In today's video, we'll be exploring 3 terrifying caving incidents that went horribly wrong. The first tale especially showcases the extraordinary lengths a true companion will go to save someone they genuinely care about. But will that love be enough? As for the other two, they are even more gut-wrenching. As always, viewer discretion is advised. In March, two close friends, Andrew and Attila, planned a caving adventure. Their excitement had been building for weeks. They were set to explore Real Well in Tennessee, known for its infamous T-entrance pit. While both had some caving experience, Attila was still relatively new, having explored just 5 caves before. Still, his passion made up for his inexperience. Andrew, the more seasoned of the two, took the lead in organizing the trip, and they both felt confident they could handle whatever the cave had in store. Or so they believed. That March morning arrived with gray skies and a steady drizzle. As they neared the cave's mouth, the deafening roar of water crashing into the pit was louder than they had expected. Andrew stopped, glancing at Attila, who stood near their gear beside the entrance. Their wetsuits were in the car, but considering the weather and the cool air, neither believed they'd need them. This choice, to leave the wetsuits behind, would prove to be one of several crucial mistakes. Despite the sheer power of the waterfall, they decided to proceed. Their excitement, maybe even pride, dulled any warnings in their minds. They set up their ropes right in the waterfall's path, fully aware they'd get soaked, but underestimating how fast the cold would affect them. Attila, in his hurry, hadn't brought his helmet, yet another major oversight. But in that moment, the thrill of the descent overpowered any thoughts of safety. Andrew went down first, the cold water striking his back as he descended. The waterfall was relentless, soaking him to the core. By the time he reached the bottom, he was already freezing. Attila followed not long after, the water crashing down harder now, making the rope feel slick and hard to grip. Inside, the cave air was heavy with moisture. The walls glistened in the dim beams of their headlamps. It was beautiful, but the cold gripped them from the start. After only a short while exploring, Attila began to feel off. His body shivered, teeth chattering uncontrollably as the chills set deeper into his bones. "Andrew, I can't stay down here," Attila said, his voice weak and trembling. "I think I need to go up." Andrew nodded, seeing things were going downhill fast. "All right, I'll get the rope set," he said, keeping calm even though he too was struggling with the cold. But the waterfall still roared, and even Andrew's experienced hands were starting to freeze. Attila quickly rigged up his climbing gear. Too quickly, in hindsight. His system included a commercial seat harness and a makeshift chest harness. Being inexperienced, he relied on a handled ascender with a cow's tail sling, linking it to his harness. Unfortunately, the cow's tail was way too long, a detail that would soon become disastrous. He also used a shunt, a backup safety tool, which only made things more complex. On top of that, Attila had linked a string of 6 non-locking carabiners to connect his ascender to the harness, an extremely risky setup. Andrew saw the chaotic configuration and considered stepping in, but before he could say anything, Attila had already begun to climb. Every move was a struggle against the freezing cascade. His gear was soaked, making everything harder. The shunt attached to his long foot sling kept slipping, failing to hold like it should. Halfway up, Attila paused, muscles aching, strength fading. His system was breaking down bit by bit. One of the carabiners had disconnected, leaving him hanging only by the overstretched cow's tail, too far to reach his gear to adjust. He shouted for Andrew, but the thunderous water drowned out his cries. "Come back down if you have to," Andrew yelled from below, his voice barely making it through. Attila tried to answer, but the words were lost. Minutes passed, painful and long, the waterfall hammering him, the cold pulling him toward unconsciousness. At last, Andrew caught the faint words, "I can't." Panic surged in Andrew. His friend was stuck, helpless in the waterfall, and time was running out. Without hesitation, Andrew clipped in and started climbing. Every inch felt like a battle, the icy water draining his energy, numbing his fingers. When he reached Attila, the scene was terrifying. Attila was limp in his harness, still conscious, but unable to move. Hypothermia had set in. His skin was pale, his shivering uncontrollable. his energy almost gone. Andrew knew the only way to save him was a pick-off maneuver, a rescue method where the rescuer attaches the stranded climber to themselves and descends together. But in this storm of freezing water, it was far harder than any training could prepare for. His hands barely worked, shaking from the cold, struggling to get gear in place. He had practiced the move a few times before, but never under these brutal conditions. His muscles screamed with effort, his thoughts foggy from the creeping cold. After a few failed attempts, he knew it wouldn't work. In desperation, Andrew tried to ascend while pulling Attila with him, but the extra weight was too much. After climbing only a few feet, Andrew's strength gave out. Both of them now hung in the freezing deluge, suspended and exposed. Andrew realized they were running out of time. With one last burst of strength, Andrew swung himself toward a nearby ledge. He clawed his way onto it, unclipping himself from the rope, and collapsed, shivering violently. His soaked clothes gave no protection from the cold. He crawled toward a slightly drier spot and lost consciousness. They gathered at the water's edge, each diver checking their gear with the precision of astronauts preparing for a spacewalk. Breathing regulators, air tanks, spools of rope, and brightly colored plastic markers, called cookies, were inspected and double-checked. In an environment where visibility could vanish within inches, these tools weren't optional. They were survival. The plan was straightforward. Two teams. Team A, led by an experienced guide, would dive first, laying out markers to map their route. Team B would follow closely behind, retracing the same path out of the cave once they reached a set point. Everyone nodded in agreement. They'd face tougher dives. This one? Moderate depths, gentle currents, and a well-traveled system. Manageable, or so they thought. Team A descended into the shimmering waters of Cenote Kimba, where crystal-clear blue gave way to murky stillness. The only sounds were their own bubbles, echoing faintly against ancient rock. They followed the main guideline, placing markers at each intersection with precise care. One wrong turn could be fatal. Soon they reached a critical junction. The lead diver fixed a yellow marker, a clear signpost for Team B. Then they moved on, smooth and silent like shadows through water. Not long after, Team B entered the water. They followed the guideline, spotting the first marker, a welcome confirmation they were on the right track. But then, somewhere along the way, everything changed. At the second intersection, Team B made a fatal mistake. Instead of turning right towards safety, they turned left, deeper into the cave system. A minor misreading, an innocent slip. The directional markers in the cave were misleading, and one shadowy tunnel looked much like the next. As they swam deeper, the mood shifted. Confidence turned to confusion. The cave didn't feel familiar anymore. They had unknowingly traveled hundreds of feet into an unmarked section, further and further from the exit. Panic began to seep in. The cold water felt colder. Fins stirred up silt, clouding the visibility to near zero. The walls around them blurred into a surreal fog. It was like the cave itself was closing in on them. Meanwhile, Team A completed their dive. Confident everything had gone smoothly, they began removing the markers on their way out, unaware that Team B was still inside and terribly lost. Deep within the labyrinth, Team B paused, realizing something was terribly wrong. One diver unspooled a backup line, hoping to find another guideline, but all he found was cold rock and impenetrable shadow. Time and air were running out. They made the difficult decision to split up. One pair surged ahead, hoping to rediscover a familiar path. But when they reached the junction where they had made their mistake, there was no marker. The one placed by Team A had already been removed. Panic hit like a thunderclap. Their breathing accelerated, and with it, their air usage. One diver's tank dropped dangerously low. In desperation, he began buddy breathing with his partner, sharing the last dwindling breaths. Back at the surface, Team A grew uneasy. Too much time had passed. Something was wrong. Grabbing extra tanks, the guide and a few others dove back in, hearts pounding. It didn't take long. Just a short distance from the exit, they found the first pair from Team B, barely alive. Tanks near empty, faces pale but breathing. When asked about the others, they replied they'd last seen their teammates not far behind. The rescuers waited. Minutes passed. No one came. They dove again. And then they saw them, suspended in the darkness near the cave ceiling. Two divers, motionless. Regulators floating beside them, useless. Their tanks showed zero pressure. They had suffocated in the very place they had come to explore. Saktun, with its twisting corridors and deathly silence, is a place of wonder, but also one where even the most skilled are vulnerable. For Team B, a single wrong turn cascaded into a nightmare. In the underwater world, even minor errors can be fatal. The Gun Barrel Nightmare, a claustrophobic cave rescue. It was a freezing January morning when a group of adventurers gathered at the snowy trailhead. They were headed to Knox Cave, known not just for its beauty, but for one legendary challenge, the Gun Barrel. This narrow keyhole-shaped tunnel was just 11 inches wide and 20 feet long, more of a rock vise than a passage. For many, crawling through it was a badge of honor, a test of both nerve and endurance. Among the group was 17-year-old Peter Vincent. It was his first caving expedition, and he was eager to prove himself. He watched the others slide into the gun barrel ahead of him, belly crawling through the impossibly tight space. When his turn came, Peter took a deep breath and wriggled in. The walls pressed against his body. The jagged rock scraped his arms and legs. Progress was slow and suffocating. Just a few feet from the exit, disaster struck. Peter's knee slipped into a narrow crevice in the floor and stuck. At first, he thought he could twist it free, but every movement made it worse. The rock held firm. Panic surged through him as he called out. The group ahead, unaware, had already passed through. The ones behind couldn't reach him. He was jammed, completely blocking the passage. The situation was dire. No one could move forward. No one could go back. The team tried everything, pulling, shifting, twisting, but the pain was unbearable. They had to stop. Time dragged. The cave was freezing. The narrow tunnel turned into an icy coffin. Hypothermia became a real threat. Trapped in total darkness, the group huddled for warmth. Peter, frightened and exhausted, began hallucinating, screaming about a snake biting his leg. There was no snake, just fear. Outside, the rest of the team realized something was wrong. One member crawled back in to check, and when he saw Peter's body blocking the gun barrel, he sprinted back to call for help. By the time rescuers arrived, it was late afternoon. The tunnel's narrowness meant standard tools were useless. Hours passed as firefighters and cave rescuers worked to free Peter. Every method failed. Finally, around 11 p.m., someone had an idea. They handed down a thermos of warm, soapy water. Carefully, they poured it around Peter's trapped leg, hoping it would provide enough lubrication to slide it free. With the group gently shifting him inside and rescuers pulling from the other end, Peter's knee slowly began to move. One final tug, and it popped free. Relief rippled through the cave, but they weren't out yet. Carefully, the group helped Peter crawl the rest of the way through. One by one, the others followed, cold and exhausted, but alive. Peter had suffered fractures and severe bruising and was treated for hypothermia. But thanks to quick thinking and teamwork, he survived. In the world of caving, bravery often comes with risk, and sometimes the smallest spaces hold the biggest dangers.